So welcome to RANsquawk's EU morning briefing for Thursday the 18th of June. At the moment, just gone through 8:30 now in London and taking a quick look around the markets. Pretty much unchanged to mix at the moment. The European bourses, even in spite of a 1.7% fall in the Nikkei and the declines we saw on Wall Street yesterday in terms of the Dow and SPOOs. Nasdaq 100 though did slightly outperform at the close, being led by Qualcomm after that, adding to conviction buy list at Goldman Sachs. They finished up individually around 4%. Some of the tech stocks did fare better in the US. But taking a look then into this morning in terms of some of the headlines, I'll start off in Asia, coming out in regards to the World Bank. They raised their forecast for China in terms of their GDP forecasts. They now predict this year to be at 7.2% from the 6.5% they projected back in March. Also, Japanese manufacturers have grown less gloomy about business conditions over the last month. That was according to a Reuters poll, which does hold some importance heading into July 1st, when we will see the Tankan survey, which is closely followed and released by the Bank of Japan. Elsewhere, obviously something that was released yesterday, but in case of anyone who wasn't around at the time, S&P ratings agency, they said that the US AAA credit rating is not likely to be lowered in the near term. They said US credit strength outweighs weaknesses despite fiscal deficits. Elsewhere, sticking on the US headlines, PIMCO's McCulley says exit strategy does include raising federal fund rates, and though the Fed unlikely to raise rates before 2011. On the geopolitical news front, further from North Korea in terms of potential missile tests and launches, they may launch a long-range ballistic missile that passes over Japan's Amuri prefecture, according to Yomiuri News. And elsewhere, New York Times saying that North Korea may fire another missile towards Hawaii. In terms of crude futures at the moment, WTI is trading slightly higher, given as well some of the weakness in the dollar index at the European entrance this morning. Taking a look as well in terms of UK headlines, obviously much of the focus there was on the King speech yesterday in his annual Mansion House talks. King pressing his case to limit the size of banks and split retail and investment banks. King also paid note that UK banks may need more capital to finance the recovery and cited constraints in lending to companies and households as the present crisis has some way to run. Darling also spoke as well. He said recent data is in line with budget forecasts of growth at the turn of the year, but still a great uncertainty. Darling did say that the UK will use any profit from selling its bank shares to reduce government debts. Inflation is a threat that's still there, and a spike in commodities could slow recovery, something that we've heard from Darling in the previous 2 weeks. Together, though, with those two speeches from King and Darling, the Telegraph wrote that King has delivered his most fiercest rebuke to the Chancellor yet, urging him to bring the public finances back in order to avoid any future further economic crisis. Finally, something we have just seen hit the wires, the Swiss National Bank, they've just had their interest rate decision. They kept rates on hold at 0.25% as widely expected by the market. They also said they'd continue their currency purchases, generous liquidity policy, and also continue their franc bond purchases. They've also released their forecast as well in terms of inflation and growth for this year, remaining unchanged on both fronts from their previous March forecast. They see the average inflation of minus 0.5% for 2009, and they say the economy may shrink between 2.5% to 3.5% this year.
The financial stability report was
the Bund futures, they are slightly underperforming at the moment. Bund's being weighed upon by quite a lot of supply coming out of Europe, predominantly out of France, and also a Spanish 30-year. In total, we'll be looking at around 9 billion euros worth. So Bund futures slightly lower this morning. And just looking ahead on the calendar, 9:30 from the UK, we'll be eyeing the UK retail sales report. And then this afternoon, eyes will be on jobs data. Continuing claims expected to remain pretty much steady. Initial jobless expected to remain pretty much steady. An expectation of 602,000. However, continuing claims are expected to continue to rise to 6.84 million today. And then the next attention will turn to the Philly Fed survey, where analysts are yet again expecting a slight improvement.